Hey guys, tonight we're slipping softly into a quieter corner of medieval life, one that buzzes softly, glints golden in the sun, and smells faintly of wildflowers and smoke. You're standing at the edge of a grassy orchard where rows of old straw skeps, those dome-shaped medieval beehives, lean gently beneath the apple trees. The sun's low, your boots are damp with dew, and somewhere nearby, a beekeeper in a hooded tunic is murmuring to the bees, not yelling, not whispering to you, to them. You're about to become a medieval bee friend, or perhaps a bee servant, or maybe, depending on the season, a bee sorcerer. It's hard to say. Because in this odd little corner of the Middle Ages, people didn't just keep bees for honey, they believed you had to talk to them gently, respectfully, or else risk catastrophe. You probably won't survive this timeline's version of bee etiquette unless you're fluent in hive-side monologue and own several yards of linen. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Oh, and post your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward through the orchard path, worn into the grass by generations of feet, clergy, farmers, widows, even children, all tasked at some point with tending these humming little temples. And yes, they were temples of a sort. In the medieval imagination, bees weren't just insects. They were near sacred, chaste, diligent, loyal to their ruler, albeit a ruler they misunderstood profoundly, but we'll get to that. As you approach the first skep, you notice the smell, a mingling of wax and crushed clover and warm straw. The bees are calm today. They're always calm if you speak to them properly. You kneel down, hands resting lightly on the rim of a mossy stone. The beekeeper beside you clears his throat softly as if preparing for church, and begins his daily litany. Good morning, friends. The sun is kind today. No thunder, no foxes in the hen house. I bring you fresh water. The orchard is blooming. You are safe. You glance sideways. Is he serious? He's absolutely serious. In fact, he's barely blinking. This odd little ritual, known in some regions as telling the bees, is older than the ink in any surviving manuscript. In England, France, and parts of Germany, it was believed that bees had to be informed of everything. Births, deaths, marriages, harvests, especially deaths. If you didn't tell the bees someone had passed, they might take offense, cease producing honey, abandon the hive, or in extreme cases, die themselves. Historians still argue whether this tradition came from Celtic animism, early Christianity, or some pan-European peasant logic, but no one doubts it was real. Entire bee colonies were known to be draped in black cloth after a beekeeper's funeral. Survivors would approach the hive, bow low, and intone the news. John the miller has passed. He tended you well. You are now in my care. The act was part superstition, part inheritance law, and part genuine respect. After all, bees kept people alive. Honey wasn't just sweetener, it was medicine, it was antiseptic, it was candle fuel for sacred mass. And the bees listened, or so it was believed. You reach toward the skep, hand hovering. The beekeeper shakes his head, gently, slowly, and offers a sprig of thyme. They like this, calms them. You hold the herb near the hive's entrance. The bees buzz lazily around it, a few landing on your sleeve. You freeze. They don't sting, they just sit. The quietness of it unnerves you. You'd expect buzzing chaos, but this is more like a crowd in prayer. There's reverence here. Talk to them, the beekeeper urges. They need to know you now. You clear your throat, unsure. Hi, I'm just visiting. I like your orchard. I brought thyme? Not exactly Shakespeare, but the bees don't seem offended. One walks delicately across your knuckle, wings twitching like silk fans. In the corner of your eye, the beekeeper smiles. They'll remember your voice, he says. They remember everything. Quirky as it seems, this belief, bee memory, bee moods, even bee loyalty, was taken seriously in the Middle Ages. Some monks wrote of bees leaving their hives to hover over battlefields where their keepers had fallen. Others claimed bees recognized human faces, a theory that modern science has, strangely, partly confirmed. Still, scholars debate whether talking to bees was widespread daily practice or reserved for moments of emotional gravity. Some argue it was mostly a rural phenomenon, a tradition passed orally from mother to daughter, rarely written down but often deeply felt. You rise slowly, brushing pollen from your knees. Insects hum around you like a living orchestra. No one's rushing, no one's shouting. You're in a world where the main communication tool is a whisper, and the audience is winged. And honestly, it feels nice. You're now officially a beekeeper's apprentice, though it feels more like a monk's novitiate. The orchard hums gently behind you as you follow the beekeeper to a stone bench shaded by a gnarled walnut tree. He sits, adjusts his hood, and begins explaining your new role. You'll be called Bee Father if folk are feeling polite, he says. Sometimes Beeman, Honeyman, or even Hive Ward. But no matter the name, the job's the same. Tend, protect, and never, never lie to your bees. You nod solemnly, unsure whether he's joking. He isn't. In medieval Europe, beekeeping was considered both a craft and a near-sacred calling. You weren't just gathering honey, you were stewarding nature's most mysterious workers. Your tools were few but essential: a wide-brimmed hood of linen to keep bees out of your hair, or, more often, beard, a curved knife for cutting honeycomb, and a smoker, usually just a clay pot with dried herbs and a smouldering coal. No plastic veils, no rubber gloves, just you, your breath, and the buzzing judgment of thousands of tiny, winged critics. Some days, the beekeeper murmurs. They sting to warn you. Some days to remind you, but most days they sting because you're being rude. You glance down at your fingers, suddenly aware of how clumsy they are. He grins. Don't worry, they'll teach you manners. Now beekeepers weren't all solemn orchard hermits. In fact, many were practical, grumpy, and smelled permanently of smoke and beeswax. But in the early medieval period, especially in monastic communities, beekeepers often held an elevated status. At places like Cluny Abbey or Glastonbury, the honey steward was entrusted with not just harvesting, but interpreting the health of the hives as signs: good bloom, a blessing; quiet bees, a warning. One manuscript from a 13th century Cistercian monastery even lists a rule of hive watch, a series of steps involving seasonal greetings, regular murmured chants, and offerings of water and herbs. Whether these rules were taken literally or symbolically, historians still argue. Some say the rituals were simply agricultural mindfulness. Others suspect genuine belief that the bees had a spiritual dimension, tiny monks in disguise. What's clearer is that beekeeping wasn't for amateurs. A failed hive meant not just less honey, but no candles for mass, no mead for winter, and no wax seals for official documents. Beeswax was a luxury, and monks used it to illuminate sacred texts in more ways than one. The beekeeper rises and gestures to a nearby table where tools are laid out like relics. A small wooden box contains tiny carved spoons used to scoop just enough wax for sealing letters. A metal knife, its blade worn to a crescent moon, is wrapped in cloth. This one, he says, was my grandfather's. Passed down like a psalm. You pick it up. The handle is smooth from generations of hands. You wonder how many bee stings that knife has seen, how many seasons it's survived. And the hat, he adds, handing you a crumpled linen hood. Not for fashion. You'll want that. You pull it over your head. The world dims slightly, but the buzzing remains clear. You feel oddly anonymous, like a pilgrim in a shrine. You talk to the hives yet? He asks. I said hi. That'll do for now. Just don't forget to tell them your name. They hate secrets. There's a pause while a squirrel knocks acorns from the tree above. You both duck instinctively. Do they, recognize faces? You ask. Some say yes, some say they know your scent, and some say they hear your heart. Science now shows bees can indeed recognize human faces, at least in a basic visual sense. But to the medieval mind, it wasn't about biology, it was about intention. Bees responded to energy, joy, sorrow, deceit. And the bee father? His job was to keep that energy steady. Of course, not everyone had the luxury of a dedicated beekeeper. Many peasants kept a single hive near the kitchen door, wedged between herb pots and washing tubs. Children were warned to never shout near the hive. Lovers whispered promises beside them. And on feast days, villagers sometimes danced around hives, offering flowers. You begin to realize something odd. This wasn't farming, it was friendship, or something like it. And bees, it turns out, were picky friends. Some hives liked being shaded, others sun-drenched. Some swarmed quickly, others stayed put for decades. Some produced golden honey tinged with thyme, others something darker, bitter, almost medicinal. Each hive is a little town, the beekeeper explains, with moods, memories, and its own politics. You think they follow the queen, but really, it's all gossip and chemistry. You both laugh softly. A nearby skep rustles as a worker bee wiggles out into the warm air. Then the beekeeper adds, more seriously, talk to them every day, even if you don't know what to say, they notice. The idea sticks with you as you walk back down the orchard path, hood trailing in the breeze. These bees are not just bugs, they are tiny, buzzing witnesses to every joy and sorrow in the village, and now you're one of their keepers. You wake the next morning to the low, melodic drone of thousands of bees already at work. No rooster crowing, no clanging church bells, just the quiet, persistent hum of wings in rhythm with the sun's rise. The beekeeper greets you with a mug of something warm and vaguely sweet. Mead, maybe? Or just herbal tea with a suspicious amount of floating pollen. Today's lesson, death. Not yours, he reassures with a crooked smile. Though if you ignore today's teaching, it might come to that. He's talking about telling the bees, and not just in passing. This isn't a side note. This is protocol. In the medieval world, when someone in the household died, especially the head of house, it wasn't just the family who needed informing. The bees needed to know. It was essential, urgent, holy, in a strange, earthy way. You're brought to the edge of the hives again, but this time there's a different atmosphere. The beekeeper carries a scrap of dark cloth. He drapes it gently over the skep, covering the entrance. You expect the bees to protest, but they quiet instead, as if waiting. He clears his throat and speaks into the covered hive. Old Thomas has passed, his debts are paid, his voice will not return. You were his friends. I tell you this with sorrow. You blink. The air shifts. Whether it's emotion or smoke or the sheer surrealism of it all, you're not sure. Historians still argue whether this ritual was a form of spiritual communication, inherited animism, or just a deeply ingrained agricultural superstition. Some call it telling the bees, others mourning the hives. But the custom is well documented, especially in England and parts of Brittany, even lingering in rural areas into the 19th century. Failure to tell the bees of a death was considered dangerous. Folklore warns they might leave the hive entirely, stop producing honey, or even die en masse. The logic? Bees are a part of the family, they must be kept in the loop or risk spiritual imbalance. You try it yourself. Standing before a smaller skep, you lift your voice, soft and uncertain. Marjorie, the baker's wife, has passed. She used to leave you petals in spring. She won't be back. There's no answer, of course, but you swear the hum around you lowers like bees shifting frequency. In some regions, people even invited the bees to the funeral, literally. Skeps were carried into courtyards or graveyards, wrapped in black veils with ribbons tied in mourning. Some families left a piece of the deceased's clothing on the hive. Others whispered prayers into the entrance hole. The lines between practical tradition and superstition blur beautifully here. You wonder, did anyone ever forget to tell the bees? The beekeeper sighs. Happened once. To a miller up north. Had 3 good hives. Forgot to tell them when his wife died. Within a week, all 3 swarmed away. Gone. Coincidence? You ask. He shrugs. Maybe, maybe not, but who's going to take that chance? It wasn't just death either. Marriages, births, baptisms, all had to be shared with the bees. In Cornwall, a groom might whisper through the hive before proposing. In parts of Normandy, a newborn's blanket was hung nearby to introduce the scent of new life. These rituals weren't jokes, they were woven into life. You're led to a wooden box where old notes and scribbled charms are kept. Some are crude rhymes, bee verses passed down like heirloom tools. To you I sing, to you I speak. The house has changed, no need to seek. Your keeper's gone, your watch remains. His son shall soothe you through your pains. It's hokey, it's sweet, it's haunting. You ask if this tradition had religious approval. The beekeeper chuckles, not officially, but even monks whispered it. There's a story of St. Gobnane. She fled to Ireland, kept bees, spoke to them daily. Legend says she sent her swarm to chase off raiders. The church canonized her anyway. He leans in, lowering his voice. Don't let anyone tell you these stories don't matter. They kept people sane, kept bees loyal, maybe even kept souls a little lighter. A nearby hive rustles as a forager returns, legs dusted with golden pollen. It spirals lazily before landing, vanishing into the warmth of the skep's entrance. You find yourself wondering what that bee knows. Has it been told the village gossip, the weather forecast, the latest heartbreaks? Probably not. But maybe, just maybe, it knows more than it lets on, and you're starting to see how talking to a hive might feel less like superstition and more like a conversation with nature itself. You bow your head one final time and say softly to the hive, "Thank you for staying." The bees keep humming. You're sitting cross-legged in the grass now, just outside the line of buzzing skeps, watching the beekeeper sway gently as he walks between the hives. But he's not just walking. He's humming, a low, repetitive melody. No words, just a gentle rise and fall, like a lullaby that's forgotten its lyrics. They like rhythm, he tells you. Steady, calm, like a river current made of sound. You nod, then pause. Are you singing to them? Of course, don't you? The answer surprises you less than it would have yesterday, because after 3 days, surrounded by beethink, nothing feels odd anymore, not even serenading a swarm. You listen closer. The tune he hums is oddly pretty. You recognize the structure. It sounds a bit like a plain song, the kind monks used during Compline prayers, but simpler, more breath than note. And that's when it hits you. This isn't for humans. This is bee music. In medieval law, singing to bees wasn't just allowed, it was encouraged. Not all songs were wordless. Some were actual chants or charms, passed down like herbal remedies. A 12th century English charm began. Bees, bees, home to your hive, your queen is here, she is alive. It rhymed, it pleaded, it soothed. Historians still argue whether these songs had pagan origins or were adapted into Christian rhythm. One theory is that the melodies were memory tools to help keepers remember rituals or tasks. Another suggests that the vibrations themselves carried on air calmed the bees' delicate nervous systems. But the people who sang them, they didn't need a reason, they just knew. Bees respond to melody. You try humming yourself, quietly, so as not to embarrass yourself or the bees. At first, your voice wavers, awkward and shy, but soon the sound settles. Something about the pattern, the repetition, it settles you too. It's hypnotic. A bee floats nearby, you freeze mid-note. Keep going, the beekeeper says, they're listening. You continue, letting the sound roll gently from your chest. The bee doesn't sting. It hovers a moment, then drifts off toward the rosemary bushes. There, he says, you're getting it. You grin, a little surprised. Apparently, medieval bee whispering has a learning curve, and you're climbing it. Then he reaches into his belt pouch and pulls out a tiny scrap of parchment. He unfolds it carefully, like it might crumble. Read this aloud. You clear your throat and begin. To thee I sing, O golden kin, bring sweetness to the hive within. By sun and smoke, by branch and bloom, I shield thee from the winter's gloom. You blink. Is this a prayer? A charm, he says. For the honey flow. In medieval times, charms like this weren't seen as superstition. They were everyday tools, spoken aloud like a recipe, half poetry, half plea. Beekeepers carried these folded charms in their satchels or etched them on wax tablets. Some even wore them on necklaces during the harvest. Skeptical, sure. But tell that to a medieval villager whose entire mead supply depended on a good honey flow. If a song might help, you'd sing until your lungs gave out. One old tale tells of a woman in Saxony who claimed her bees doubled their honey after she sang to them daily. Naturally, no one believed her until neighboring hives began to fail and hers thrived. The abbess allegedly began to hum, too. Do you think it really works, you ask? The beekeeper shrugs. Works on people, why not bees? He's got a point. You think about how soothing a lullaby can be, how rhythm anchors the mind. Maybe the bees don't understand, but they respond. And maybe that's enough. You follow him to another skep. This one's quieter, the hum a bit softer. Late bloomers, he says. Shy colony. He gestures. Sing for them. You kneel beside the hive, press your palms to the sun-warmed straw, and begin again. This time, you invent the tune as you go, something soft, swaying, repetitive. You add words. Little ones, the flowers wait. Wake gently. No rush. We're here. And for a moment, you feel like the hive is leaning closer, just slightly, listening. Modern science has shown that bees are sensitive to vibration, capable of interpreting subtle changes in air pressure. In hives today, some keepers even play soft music or record vibrations to study hive moods. But in medieval times, the knowledge was intuitive. One fringe belief held that bees understood Latin hymns better than vulgar tongues, another that they preferred women's voices or the low drone of a bass singer. Yet another theory claimed certain pitches could direct a swarm in mid-flight, like whistling to a dog, but for 10,000 tiny wings. The beekeeper chuckles as you finish your song. Not bad, could use a chorus. You laugh. I'll work on it. He leans against a tree. Sing to them, talk to them, chant over them. It's not about magic. It's about being part of the rhythm. And once you're in it, once you match the hum, everything else fades. You sit back, smiling. Around you, the orchard thrums gently. You've never felt more oddly at peace. With bees, with the breeze, with your own heartbeat. Maybe it's the charm. Maybe it's the honey air. Or maybe, just maybe, you're starting to speak fluent beehive. You stretch your legs and follow the beekeeper toward the edge of the orchard, where the landscape dips gently into a low valley. There, nestled beneath a crumbling stone wall, sits a row of unusually shaped hives, one tall and narrow like a chimney, another rounded like a jug, and yet another fashioned from woven reeds so tight they might hold water. These, the beekeeper says with a soft smile, are the fancy ones. He taps a ceramic pot. Imported from the south, Spanish style. Expensive, fragile, and not nearly as clever as they look. You crouch beside it, running your fingers over the cool, glazed surface. It's beautiful and clearly old, decorated with faint, spiraling patterns and capped with a domed lid pierced with holes. So, what's the standard, you ask? He points back to the orchard. The skep. Straw, coiled tight, waterproofed with cow dung and clay. Cheap, easy to patch. Doesn't look like much, but it works. And it does work. Medieval beekeepers didn't have the modern box hives you'd see today. With their neat little drawers and frames, they worked with what they had. Straw, wood, mud, bark, even hollow logs or clay pots. The goal was always the same: create a dark, dry, sheltered space bees would accept as home. Monasteries often built elaborate wooden bee shelters, bee bowls, in south-facing walls, complete with ledges for the skeps to rest on and overhangs to keep the rain off. In noble estates, skeps might be adorned with decorative carvings, painted heraldry, or arranged in neat geometric rows to impress visitors. Even kings had apiaries. Some say Charlemagne had hives in every estate, the beekeeper mutters, and he probably made his poor servants sing to all of them. You chuckle. How did they harvest honey without opening them? He raises an eyebrow. They didn't, not gently anyway. And here's the gritty part. To harvest honey from a traditional skep, medieval beekeepers often had to destroy part or all of the hive. There was no easy access, no pull-out tray, no polite knock and request for a comb or two. The usual methods involved flipping the skep over, smoking the bees heavily, and either shaking out the comb or, in worse cases, killing the colony with sulfur fumes and scraping everything out. Brutal, yes, but before you judge too harshly, remember, medieval people didn't have sugar. Honey was everything: sweetener, medicine, candle wax, even tax currency in some regions. Losing a hive was tragic, yes, but so was starving through a long winter without any preserved fruit or light. Nowadays you keep the bees, the beekeeper says. Back then, sometimes you just took what you could. Not all keepers were so ruthless. Some learned to cut carefully, removing only the combs heavy with honey, avoiding the brood nest where the young bees grew. Others tried to divide hives after harvest, encouraging swarming to restock what was lost. And in the more progressive monasteries, early versions of wooden-framed hives were being experimented with. Scholars at Monte Cassino and Cluny left behind strange diagrams, part schematic, part prayer, that may have been precursors to the modern Langstroth hive. Historians still debate it. You examine one of the more rudimentary homes, a log hive, hollowed out and hung from a tree limb like a sleepy wooden beast. It smells of resin and beeswax and bark. Perfect for forest keepers, the beekeeper says. Tough to move, but the bees love the quiet. In northern and eastern Europe, these log hives, known as bee gums or tree hives, were common among wild harvesters. Some even carved small doors into trees and built shrines around them, turning the hive into a spiritual object. You crouch low to look inside one. A single worker bee emerges, buzzes in lazy circles, then returns. The rhythm never stops. So, you ask, which one do the bees like best? He shrugs. Whichever one smells like home. It wasn't just the shape that mattered, it was the scent. Medieval beekeepers often rubbed hives with lemon balm, crushed rosemary, or old honeycomb to attract new swarms. Some even placed statues or religious tokens nearby, believing it would bless the hive. St. Ambrose, he says, tapping the rim of a skep. Patron saint of bees, always keep his name on your lips when you patch a crack. You do just that, murmuring Ambrosius under your breath as you nudge a bit of straw back into place. The hives hum in response. Whether it's the design, the devotion, or the sheer stubbornness of medieval farmers, one thing becomes clear. People really cared about their bees. Not just as livestock, but as neighbors. As you walk back toward the main path, your fingers sticky with propolis and a stray bee riding along on your shoulder, you start to understand. These weren't just containers of honey. They were living homes woven with breath, prayer, and old-fashioned ingenuity. And the people who built them, they talked to their bees, and maybe, just maybe, the bees talked back. Back near the edge of the orchard, the beekeeper crouches beside a small clay pot, its contents smouldering gently. Wisps of grey-blue smoke curl into the air, drifting toward the skeps like an offering. The scent hits you, earthy, herbal, and a little spicy. Definitely not the acrid smoke of a campfire. It's gentler, familiar. You take another sniff. Is that thyme? He nods. And sage, a touch of lavender. They like it, calms them. You're learning quickly that beekeeping in the Middle Ages wasn't just about tools, it was about rituals, and none were more sacred or more misunderstood by outsiders than smoking the hive. Today, it's your job to prepare the smoker. You kneel beside the little pot, mimicking your teacher's hands as you drop the dried herbs in carefully, watching the fire catch slowly. It doesn't flare, it doesn't roar, it just smokes. A steady stream like the sigh of a tired spirit. Smoke has always played a crucial role in beekeeping, ancient and modern alike. It masks the bees' alarm pheromones, disrupts their communication, and encourages them to gorge on honey in preparation for a potential evacuation. Full bees are calmer bees. But in the medieval world, smoke was more than a bee management tool. It was spiritual, symbolic. It was protection, purification, and sometimes persuasion. You never use pitch, the beekeeper warns, too thick. They choke. Use only plants, the ones that talk to the wind. And that's how he puts it. Plants that talk to the wind. Meaning herbs that burn clean, carry scent, and, according to some, carry intention. In some regions, beekeepers swore by juniper and rosemary. Others favoured mint or mugwort. And in Eastern Europe, beekeepers were known to recite protective prayers while the smoke rose, believing it formed a spiritual barrier as much as a practical one. Historians still argue whether this was more charm than science, but again, to the people doing it, it was both. You smoked the hive not only to pacify, but to bless. Today, your blessing is for a new hive. A recent swarm has settled into a fresh skep, and your job is to welcome them, not with commands or tools, but with smoke and a steady voice. You kneel, hold the pot steady, and wave the smoke gently across the skep's entrance. Inside there's movement, not panic, just awareness. The bees emerge in slow spirals, feeling out the change. They crawl across the skep, wings rising, then settle again. Say something, the beekeeper whispers. You take a breath. You're home now. There's thyme in the field, lavender in the hedgerow. We planted chamomile for you. Stay. The bees hum low, no louder than before. But something about the air feels different, less tense, more aware. In medieval Germany, some beekeepers even chanted snippets of the Psalms while smoking the hive. Psalm 104, especially, was popular. The trees of the Lord are full of sap, wherein the birds make their nests. Some thought the bees were like God's birds, making their nests in sacred places. You think about that now as you add more dried sage to the pot. Smoke drifts up your sleeves, fills your hood, clings to your hair. But it's not unpleasant. It's comforting. Like incense in a cathedral. What happens if you don't smoke them? You ask. He grimaces. You'll find out soon enough. And you do. Later that afternoon, in a moment of misplaced confidence, you approach an older hive without preparing your pot. You lean in, say your greeting, but the hum inside is high-pitched, sharp. You've learned the warning signs by now. 1, then 2 bees zip toward you with alarming speed. You flinch, swat, mistake. 1 sting lands on your hand. Another, mercifully, misses your cheek. The beekeeper rushes over, waving his own smoke between you and the hive like a priest fending off evil spirits. Evil spirit. You back away, muttering apologies. Your hand throbs, your pride worse. Told you, he says, smirking slightly. They're polite creatures, but not fond of surprises. That night you soak your hand in cool water steeped with chamomile and rue. The pain fades, the lesson remains. You remember now, smoke isn't aggression, it's permission, a way of saying, I'm coming in peace. Even more interesting, some old beekeeping texts suggest the smoke carried more than scent. It carried intention, kindness even, and some believed bees could sense your emotions through the smoke itself. So from then on, every time you light the little pot and drop in the dried herbs, you take a moment. You breathe deep. You think about what you're doing, not just that you're doing it. You're not forcing the bees, you're asking. And as the smoke rises in lazy ribbons, blending with the sunlight and the orchard breeze, you begin to understand why so many medieval keepers saw smoke as sacred. It wasn't just a tool, it was a translator between man and bee, between request and response, and every puff was a word. You wake the next day to find the beekeeper hunched over a small wooden table, scraping something thick and golden into a jar. His sleeves are rolled, and his fingers shine with syrupy light. The smell is unmistakable, rich, floral, and ancient. Honey, but not just honey. Something thicker, more opaque. It clings to the knife like resin. Royal jelly, he says before you can ask. Sort of. Might be wax mixed in, might be propolis, might be whatever the bees were in the mood to make. He dips a finger in and offers it to you. You taste cautiously. It's sweet, sure, but also earthy, like the inside of a wildflower mixed with the breath of a forest. You're not sure if it's food or medicine. He laughs at your face. Medieval answer, both. In the Middle Ages, bee products were prized not just for their taste, but for their healing powers. Honey was used in everything, from preserving fruits to sealing wounds. Doctors of the time, both folk and scholarly, mixed it into ointments, poured it into cough remedies, and spread it on burns. If it hurt, festered, or needed softening, someone somewhere prescribed honey. You leaf through an old codex from the Abbey infirmary. It's full of recipes: honey with crushed garlic for lung ailments, honey and vinegar for sore throats, honey boiled with crushed rose petals to treat melancholy. Some even believed honey had spiritual purity. In certain monastic orders, only honey candles could be used on altars. No tallow, no smoke. Just clean, golden light from God's favorite insect. But not all bee products were sweet. You're handed a small lump of dark resin, brittle, sticky, and pungent. Propolis, the beekeeper explains. Bee glue. They use it to seal cracks, patch gaps. We use it to make our teeth ache less. He points to a small bottle where bits of propolis float in alcohol. Leave it long enough, and you've got a tincture. Tastes awful, works wonders. Indeed, medieval toothache remedies often featured propolis. And not just for teeth. Some healers used it for ulcers, infected cuts, even tumours. It was a catch-all, a medieval antibiotic, before they knew what bacteria were. Modern science backs up some of these beliefs. Propolis contains natural antimicrobials and anti-inflammatories, but to a medieval villager it was just bee magic. People didn't question it, the beekeeper says. They just saw it work. You're still rubbing the resin between your fingers when he hands you another object, a shallow, heart-shaped honeycomb wrapped in cloth. A wedding gift, he says. You raise an eyebrow. From bees? He nods. Rare, but not unheard of. Some hives produced combs in odd shapes, hearts, crosses, even faces, if you believed the rumours. When it happened, folks took it as a sign. In one village tale, a bride found a perfect hexagon in her dowry hive, cut clean as a jewel. She wore it in a pouch around her neck for years, swearing it kept her husband faithful, which might have been helped by the fact that he was allergic to bees. There's a deeper superstition too. Bees were said to sense purity, harmony, even love. Hives that thrived after a marriage were proof of the couple's virtue. If they failed, well, maybe someone wasn't being honest. Historians still debate whether such stories were widespread belief or just local folklore, but they appear often enough in old diaries and parish records to be taken seriously by someone. Including your beekeeper, apparently. He hands you a beeswax salve next. Smooth, pale yellow with a faint scent of rose and lard. For cracked hands, or if you mix it with valerian, a sleep balm. You rub a bit into your fingers. It soothes instantly, no sting, no grease, just warmth. In medieval times, beeswax was everywhere. Used in candle making, of course, but also in cosmetics, waterproofing, sealing scrolls, even casting molds for metalwork. It was versatile and precious. A proper candle made of beeswax could burn clean for hours and barely drip. He gestures toward the chapel at the edge of the orchard. Only beeswax on Easter, symbol of purity, light born without sin. You imagine the warm glow of those candles during midnight mass, the hush, the scent of honey smoke. A congregation lit not just by fire, but by the labor of 10,000 wings. You never really thought about it before, but these bees were medieval pharmacists, engineers, alchemists. And the people who tended them weren't just farmers, they were collectors of miracles. Still, the beekeeper says, leaning back, none of it'll help you if you eat too much at once. Monk up north ate half a comb in one sitting, had visions for 2 days, swore St. Peter was inside his kneecap. You both laugh, but part of you wonders, what would a dream soaked in honey feel like? That night, you spread a thin layer of comb on dark rye bread, sip a spoonful of warm milk and honey, and lie back on the straw pallet in your cottage. Outside, the bees are still humming. Inside, your bones feel like wax warmed by the hearth. And for a fleeting moment, as your eyes slip shut, you could swear you hear St. Peter knocking politely from inside your kneecap. The next morning begins with a scandal. You're standing near the edge of the orchard, sleep still clinging to your eyelashes, when a woman storms up the path, skirts flaring, voice sharp. Someone's taken my hive. The beekeeper barely flinches. Which one? The one near the well, gone, vanished, the whole thing, skep, stones, bees. He nods, slowly, grimly. Bee theft? You blink. That's a thing? Oh yes, he says, and not just a thing, a crime. You follow the pair down the muddy track toward the well, where a bare patch of flattened grass and a few scattered stones mark the spot where a skep once stood. The woman looks heartbroken, as though a pet has run away. The beekeeper kneels, inspecting the tracks in the dirt. He picks up a stray bee wing and sighs. Fresh lift before sunrise. And just like that, you're swept into the underworld of medieval apiculture. Bee crime. Turns out hives were serious property, especially valuable ones, that consistently produced strong harvests, and just like livestock, they could be stolen, sold, and yes, even litigated over. You stroll back to the cottage as the beekeeper mutters something about fetching the reeve. He means to report it. There will be a hearing. In medieval Europe, bee theft wasn't petty. It could mean the loss of a family's winter light, medicine, and food. And because bees were mobile, it was easy for thieves to smuggle them away in the night. They'd smoke the hive, wrap it in damp cloth to keep the bees drowsy, and carry it off like a particularly angry picnic basket. You imagine someone sneaking through a hedgerow, hood pulled low, whispering apologies to the hive they're stealing. Nothing personal, bees, just business. Some regions, especially in Germany and Flanders, had detailed laws protecting bee ownership. In some cases, a stolen swarm could be reclaimed if it still responded to its original keeper's voice. Think of it like medieval biometric ID. If the bees buzzed back when you sang to them, the court might rule in your favor. Historians still debate whether this vocal recognition claim holds water. Could bees really identify their beekeeper by sound? Some say yes, citing modern studies on bee memory. Others believe it was more symbolic, a kind of moral litmus test for rightful ownership. You reach the little workbench beside the hives, the beekeepers already there, hammering a small wooden sign into the earth. It reads, By order of the reeve, this hive watched. A warning, a plea, maybe both. He turns to you. Want to know how to protect a hive? You nod. Name it. You raise an eyebrow. Like a dog. Exactly. Every hive should have a name. Bees know it. Thieves fear it. He gestures to one of the older skeps. A tiny wooden placard hangs from its side, burned with the word Martha. Martha? You ask. Reliable, calm in winter, never swarmed too early, lost her once, came back a day later like she'd only gone to visit a cousin. He grins. Named hives are harder to steal. People ask questions. Where's Martha? Not just some bees. Makes it personal. There's something oddly touching about it, like each hive is a little soul, with its own quirks and preferences. You decide to name one yourself. The smallest skep near the elderflower tree becomes Branwen. You whisper the name at dawn, tap the side gently, leave a few drops of honey on a stone in front of her. It feels silly, sacred. The line between the two is blurry out here. Blurry.
Later that day, a boy from the village appears with red cheeks and fidgeting hands. He has a confession. His older brother took the hive, swore he'd share it, didn't, hid it near the river, under a fallen oak. The boy heard the bees crying at night. He couldn't sleep. You glance at the beekeeper. He's silent for a long time. Then he nods. Take me to them. By sunset, the skep is back. The bees are disoriented but alive. The beekeeper places it in a quiet corner, surrounded by herbs. He hums to them, tells them the danger has passed. No punishment is given. Just a warning. To steal a hive, he says softly, is to steal trust. Not just from a person, from the bees themselves. You think about that as you walk the orchard alone later that evening. It's not just honey you protect, it's memory, rhythm, the invisible web between humans and their humming companions. As you pass Branwen, you murmur her name again and swear, just for a second, you hear the hum shift in reply. The next morning dawns misty and soft, the sky the colour of beeswax, and the orchard hushed as if waiting for something. You follow the beekeeper to the chapel at the far edge of the grounds, where a carved wooden relief above the door shows something strange. A man with outstretched arms, surrounded not by angels, but by bees. He touches the door gently. Saint Modamnock, he says, patron saint of getting swarmed without panicking? He chuckles. Close enough. You step inside. The chapel is small and dim, smelling of old wood, smoke, and dried lavender. In the far corner, nestled between two arched windows, is a small shrine, a bundle of carved hives, a painted image of a man in monk's robes cradling a swarm, and a beeswax candle that seems to have burned low and often. He brought his bees to Ireland, the beekeeper whispers. Literally, they followed him across the sea. The story goes that Saint Modamnock, an Irish monk studying in Wales under Saint David, tended the monastery's hives. He loved the bees, talked to them daily, sang to them, whispered prayers. And when it came time to return to Ireland, the bees followed him, first to the shore, then on to the ship, refusing to be left behind. And so, the beekeeper says, he became their saint, not because he asked, because they chose him. You stand in silence, feeling the reverence in the air. Saint Modamnock wasn't alone in bee-related sainthood. There was also Saint Ambrose, whose cradle, legend claims, was swarmed by bees without harming him, an omen of his future eloquence. Bees became his symbol. And then there's St Gobnet, patroness of bees and beekeepers in parts of Ireland, who is said to have driven off thieves with a swarm she summoned by prayer. Historians still argue whether these tales were metaphors or believed literally. But the people who passed them down didn't care. The saints had bees, and the bees listened. You leave the chapel with a new sense of awe, stepping back into the orchard just as a small group of villagers arrive, clutching herbs and scraps of linen. It's time for the bee telling, a yearly custom of communal gratitude and prayer. Each person approaches a hive and speaks a short message. A child thanks the bees for honey in her porridge. An old man asks for good luck in next year's bloom. A young woman, shy and barely audible, tells her hive about her upcoming wedding. One woman kneels before a large skep, lays a single white rose at its base and whispers, "He passed peacefully. Thank you for the light." You watch, stunned. This isn't spectacle, it's devotion. As real and reverent as any church service, the beekeeper leans in. "We believe bees carry messages to heaven. If you whisper to them at dawn and they take flight, your words rise with them." You feel a lump in your throat. It's ridiculous. It's beautiful. It's real. You approach Branwen's hive, the nameplate still gently swaying from the morning breeze. You crouch low, press your palm to the straw, and say the first thing that comes to mind. "Please keep her safe. She's kind. She listens." You don't say who she is, but maybe the bees know. In medieval folklore, bees were thought to have a direct link to the soul, not just a symbol of purity or order, but a messenger between the seen and unseen. They could bless or curse, warn or comfort. Some even believed that a bee entering your home uninvited carried a message from the dead. And while the church never officially endorsed such beliefs, many monasteries quietly allowed bee law to coexist with doctrine. After all, if a creature worked hard, lived clean, produced light, and never caused unnecessary harm, wasn't it already halfway to sainthood? You walk with the beekeeper along the eastern wall where a carved inscription reads, "A voice without speech, a prayer with wings." He nods toward it. That's what the old ones called the hum of a hive. You stop, listen.
Thousands of bees, thousands of wings, one sound, not music, not noise, a kind of memory. That evening you find a tiny beeswax figure tucked beside your cot, shaped like a monk holding a hive. No note, just the soft scent of honey and smoke. You don't need to ask who left it. As you fall asleep, the hum lingers in your ears, fading slowly like a whispered benediction. The next day begins with the smell of something off. Not bad exactly, but sharp, tangy, like old vinegar left in the sun. You follow the beekeeper down a muddy path to a cart behind the granary, where a pile of old skeps is stacked like forgotten helmets. A few are cracked, others stained, all of them apparently destined for disposal. Except he isn't throwing them away, he's filling them with bees. "Wait," you say, blinking. "Aren't these too old?" "Not for this," he mutters. "We don't want the bees to stay, just to fly." You blink again. "Fly? Where?" He lifts a skep, slides it into the cart's compartment, and smiles with an expression that can only be described as mischievous. "To the enemy?" "Yes. Today you learn that in the Middle Ages, bees weren't only medicine or messengers or sacred companions, they were weapons." Historians still argue whether it was widespread or mostly legend, but documented accounts from the medieval and classical world describe armies hurling hives over fortress walls, dropping skeps into trenches, even catapulting angry swarms into enemy barracks. Bee bombs. "Siege of Rhodes," the beekeeper mutters. "Bees drove the invaders from the north gate. Too many stings, too little armor." You stare at the cart. You're joking? He doesn't answer, just lights a slow-smoking bundle of rosemary and tucks it under one skep. The bees inside begin to stir. Imagine, he says softly, you're marching uphill in full chain mail, sweating through leather and wool. You breach a wall, think it's empty, and then he flings his arm wide in an imaginary toss. Bam! 10,000 bees, no shields, no prayers. You wince. Better than arrows, he shrugs. They find the gaps and they don't miss. In truth, beekeeping manuals from as far back as the 9th century mention using bees in defense. One chronicle describes villagers setting skeps atop city walls, ready to tip them over onto any climbing attackers. Another tells of a monastery storing hives along the riverbank, repurposed as deterrents to raiders. Still, not all used bees for war. Some just moved them away during conflict, hoping to protect the hive. Problem is, the beekeeper sighs, bees don't care who's fighting, they just defend what's theirs. You help him lift one of the lighter skeps onto the cart, careful not to tilt it too much. The hum inside is high-pitched, nervous. Do you think they know they're being sent to battle? You ask. He shakes his head. Doesn't matter, their instincts do the rest. Later that day, you ride the cart out toward the far hill, where an abandoned watchtower overlooks a shallow gorge. A mock drill is underway, a local militia practicing maneuvers. The beekeeper grins like a schoolboy. You stay back. From a safe distance, you watch as he gently unseals a skep and lifts the lid with a long hooked stick. The bees erupt in a golden cloud, disoriented and angry. The drill stops, the militia scatters. One man falls into a puddle, swatting wildly at his helmet. Another drops his sword and runs toward the creek, bees chasing like tiny avenging angels. The beekeeper just nods. Still works. You head home with the empty skeps rattling in the cart and the distinct feeling that you've just witnessed something weirdly powerful. That night, sitting beside the hearth, you ask, did people really use bees for war, or is that just legend? He shrugs. Does it matter? If the story keeps you from climbing my wall, then it's worked. You sip warm mead, wondering how many lives have been saved by the threat of a swarm. There's an old proverb he recites before bed. A knight fears fire, a thief fears law, but a wise man fears a beekeeper with nothing to lose. You laugh, then pause, because honestly, you do. It's a gentle afternoon when the village sends word. A wedding is happening, not a grand affair. Just two local farmers, young and hopeful, tying their lives together in the chapel with flowers, blessings, and bees. You raise an eyebrow. The bees are invited. Sort of, the beekeeper replies. They have a part to play. You follow him into the orchard, where preparations are already underway. A garland of meadow flowers has been laid across the entrance of one hive. Someone's placed a tiny white ribbon on the nameplate of Branwen. She looks elegant today, humming contentedly. What's the tradition? You ask. He smiles, eyes soft with memory. In some places it's custom to gift a hive to the bride. A dowry of honey, you might say. But deeper than that, it's about blessing the union. Bees are loyal. They're devoted. They build together. What better symbol for marriage? He pauses. And besides, they're good judges of character. Turns out, bees and marriage have been linked for centuries. In some medieval regions, especially parts of Britain and France, it was believed that placing a hive near a newlywed's home would ensure harmony and fertility. Others took it further. If the bees were calm during the ceremony, it was a good omen. If they swarmed, perhaps not. Historians still debate whether these customs were widespread or localized folk beliefs, but written records from the 15th and 16th centuries show multiple mentions of bridal bees and hive blessings. Some say bees can smell deceit, the beekeeper adds, eyes twinkling, which is why the nervous ones tend to stand further from the skep. You arrive at the wedding site, a clearing near the chapel, where the couple stands beneath a simple arch of branches. The priest raises his hands, the crowd murmurs blessings. And then the beekeeper steps forward. He carries a small, lidded skep, new, bright, freshly woven. Inside, a small nucleus colony buzzes softly. He places it at the bride's feet and says, "May these bees mirror your life, busy, fruitful, and full of sweetness." The bride beams, the groom gulps. Later, after the vows and laughter, a soft breeze stirs the orchard. You spot a few bees spiraling lazily through the air, drawn by the scent of crushed thyme and spilled wine. No one swats, no one panics. Instead, the couple turns to the hive and bows their heads, just briefly, in quiet thanks. As twilight falls, the beekeeper hands you a bundle wrapped in linen. "Take this to the couple's new home," he says. "Place it by the threshold." You peek inside, a beeswax candle, a sprig of rosemary, and a comb shaped like a spiral. "A charm?" you ask. "A promise." In medieval lore, bees were sometimes used to seal a marriage. A drop of honey shared between lips on the wedding night. A beeswax figure placed under the pillow. Even a belief that the queen bee could bless a fertile womb, though people hadn't quite figured out that the queen wasn't in fact a king. Yes, here comes the strange part. For much of medieval history, people assumed the leading bee was male, the king bee. It's baffling in hindsight, given the queen's obvious central role. But without microscopes or modern entomology, gender roles were often imposed on bees through a human lens. "Only men lead," the beekeeper says dryly, or so the monks believed. It wasn't until the 1600s, post-medieval technically, that scientists like Jan Swammerdam proved the queen was female. Before that, people wrote about the king bee's noble rule, his chastity, his military strength. Chastity, right. Imagine their shock, you say, if they'd known she was constantly surrounded by thousands of males whose sole job was to mate with her and die. He nods, amused. History's full of humbling discoveries. You deliver the charm bundle to the newlyweds as night falls. Their cottage glows with candlelight. Outside, they've already chosen a spot for their hive, facing east, beneath a hawthorn tree. As you walk back, the orchard glimmers under the stars. The bees have gone quiet for the night, tucked into their skeps like so many folded prayers. You pass Branwen, pat her gently, and whisper, "They're good people. Keep watch." In the distance, laughter drifts through the trees, and somewhere, deep in the hive, wings stir softly in approval. You wake before dawn to the sound of distant bells and a hush so deep even the bees haven't begun to stir. The air is cold, damp, the kind of quiet that makes you tiptoe for no real reason at all. The beekeeper is already up, standing barefoot in the dew, eyes closed, facing the eastern sky. You approach quietly. "Is this part of the job?" He opens one eye, then the other. "Today, we talk to the dead." "Ah, one of those mornings." He hands you a small cloth bundle. Inside, beeswax candles, a wooden rosary, and a folded scrap of parchment with something written in a looping, cramped Latin hand. "Today," he repeats, "the bees carry messages." In some parts of medieval Europe, particularly among monks and mystics, it was believed that bees had access to spiritual realms, not just in the metaphorical sense, truly, directly. They were seen as messengers to heaven, bridges between the living and the dead. It's said that if you whisper to bees at the right moment, during the matin's bell, or as the sun rises, or just after a soul departs, they can carry your words into the great beyond. Why bees, you ask as you walk toward the hives. Because they go where we cannot, the beekeeper replies, and return. You kneel beside Branwen. She's still quiet, the hive cool beneath your hands. You press your forehead gently to the straw and whisper, no elaborate speech, just a name, just a feeling. You don't even know if you believe it, but you say it anyway. Tell her I'm all right. You feel ridiculous, you feel relieved. Across the orchard, the others do the same. One by one, people emerge from the mist, farmers, monks, a girl no older than 10, each finding their hive, their moment, their breath, each releasing a name into the world on the wings of bees. Historians still debate the roots of this practice. Was it born from ancient animist beliefs folded into Christian rites, a survival of older Celtic rites, possibly all three? What matters is that it survived, passed down in whispers and rituals, never fully sanctioned, never fully stamped out. You light a beeswax candle and place it beside Branwen. The flame flickers, steady, warm. The beekeeper joins you holding his own candle. Some say bees carry souls, he murmurs. When they leave the hive in great numbers, it's not just a swarm, it's a pilgrimage. You picture it now, a golden storm of wings rising into the sky, spiraling like incense, climbing toward something unseen. He tells you of a story from a monastery in Normandy, how the abbot died suddenly, and the bees left their hives hovering over the chapel until his burial was complete. The monks took it as a sign their prayers had been received. You lean back against the trunk of an apple tree, listening to the soft morning sounds. The world is slowly waking. One bee emerges, yawns, or so it seems, and takes off in a lazy spiral. You whisper one more name, just to be safe. The beekeeper smiles. They're better couriers than pigeons. You snort. Less messy, too. The sun rises higher, washing the orchard in soft gold. Bees begin to emerge, stretching, buzzing, testing the air. A few land near your hands. One even dances briefly on your boot. You remember now, in some traditions, bees were thought to escort souls. A dying person's breath might attract a bee. If it landed nearby, it was considered a blessing, a safe passage. You wonder how many goodbyes have been whispered to hives over the centuries. How many last words were carried by bees across fields, over rivers, into the great unknown. And you wonder, do the bees remember them? Do they carry stories in their wings? Maybe that's what the humming is. Not just sound, not just vibration, but memory. You leave the candle burning beside Branwen and walk back slowly, heart lighter, the morning now filled with the soft, familiar buzz of a world stirring to life. One voice at a time. You're organizing the storage shed, recoiling rope, brushing dust from spare skeps, trying not to sneeze, when the beekeeper calls out from across the orchard. You ever meet a king bee? You pause. You mean queen? He walks over, grinning. Not in the Middle Ages, you didn't? Ah, yes. Today's lesson, mistaken gender identity, medieval edition. You step into the shade of the nearest tree, where a hive hums lazily in the heat. The beekeeper lifts the lid carefully and points to the center of the frame, where a larger, more regal bee moves with slow purpose among the workers. She's the boss, he says, but for hundreds of years they called her he. It's true. Despite the clear behavioral evidence, this central bee laid eggs, rarely left the hive, and was tended to by dozens of devoted drones. Medieval and even Renaissance writers consistently referred to her as the king. Why? Simple. In their world, leadership was male, kings ruled. Queens, if they ruled at all, were seen as exceptions. So naturally, they assumed the ruler of the hive was male too. You shake your head. They saw her laying eggs and still thought she was a king? Apparently, even the evidence didn't sway them. Not until the 1600s. Indeed, it wasn't until 1609 when Charles Butler, an English vicar and beekeeper, proposed, in the feminine monarchy, that the ruler of the hive was female. A bold claim at the time, and one that took decades to be accepted. Before that, writers like Virgil and Pliny the Elder described the noble king bee as chaste, wise, and strong, a reflection of what they thought kings ought to be. Historians still debate how much of this was genuine misunderstanding versus cultural projection. But the truth is, for centuries, people looked at the hive and saw what they expected to see, not what was there. You can't see clearly, the beekeeper says, if you've already made up your mind. He leans against a tree and pulls out a brittle old scroll. You read over his shoulder. It's a passage from an abbey manuscript describing the royal bee. And the king bee remaineth in the house, issuing not forth, yet directing all. You snort. Directing nothing. She lays eggs, that's it. She lays everything, he corrects. No queen, no hive. And that's the irony. While she was misgendered, she was still revered. The king bee was thought to embody purity, strength, and divine order. She was the soul of the colony. If she died, chaos followed. In some medieval texts, the hive itself was used as a model for society, a just king, tireless workers, and an orderly, peaceful community. Never mind that the drones mostly loafed around and only had one job before dying dramatically in mid-air. Maybe the monks didn't want to admit the ruler was female, you say, because it meant the whole metaphor fell apart. Or maybe, the beekeeper replies, they just never looked close enough. You gaze into the hive. The queen, yes, queen, moves deliberately. The workers part for her, tend to her, feed her. She is not bossy, she does not command, but her presence organizes the entire hive. There's something oddly poetic in it. You remember a passage the beekeeper shared once from a 12th century nun's journal. The bees honor their sovereign not through fear, but through faith. She is the pulse beneath the comb. You ask him if he's ever named a queen. Sometimes, he says, if she's earned it. You decide this one deserves a name, something regal, not Elizabeth, too obvious, maybe something older. Matilda. He nods approvingly. Matilda it is. Later, you carve the name into a small wooden plaque and hang it near her hive. As you do, you reflect on how much can be misunderstood simply by assumption. How many truths stay hidden because no one bothers to look closely? You whisper to the hive, they called you king, but you were queen all along. The bees hum louder, just briefly, as if amused. That night, beside the fire, the beekeeper tells one last story, about a village where the hives stopped producing honey. The people blamed bad weather, poor soil, spirits in the woods. But it wasn't until someone noticed the queen had died that they understood. No queen, he repeats, no hive. And just like that, the lesson lands. It isn't about the title, it's about the pulse, the one beneath the comb. The orchard is unusually lively today, not with voices, but with wings. You stand beside Branwen's hive, squinting in the afternoon sun, watching as one bee after another performs an odd little zigzag in the air. Not aimless buzzing, not foraging. This is deliberate, rhythmic, almost like a dance. You turn to the beekeeper. Are they drunk? He doesn't look up from his basket of herbs. Dancing? You blink. Seriously? Oh yes, that's how they talk. You cross your arms. I thought they talked with their, I don't know, antennae? They do, but when a worker finds something worth sharing, flowers, water, good sap, she comes home and does a little jig to show everyone where it is. You watch more closely now. A bee returns to the hive entrance, wiggles in a tight figure eight, then circles back again. Other bees stop what they're doing to watch, then fly off in the direction she seemed to indicate. This is real? You ask. He nods. We didn't figure it out until the 20th century, but bees, they've known it for millions of years. You're stunned. So in medieval times, we noticed it, he says. We just didn't understand it. In truth, medieval beekeepers wrote occasionally about the restless dances of returning bees, especially in spring. Some believed it was a kind of worship. Others suspected it was madness or a symptom of poor hive health. A few, more poetically inclined, called it the bee's joy, believing the hive responded to sunlight with celebration. Historians still debate whether anyone ever suspected it was language. But they knew it meant something. They just didn't have the framework to see the code behind the choreography. You watch as another bee begins her waggling dance near the hive mouth. This one draws a tighter loop, then scampers forward a few steps before spinning around and repeating. Her sisters lean in, they're paying attention. You are too. The beekeeper hands you a slate and some chalk. Try sketching it. You crouch and start drawing. Loop, waggle, straight line, turn. It's surprisingly complex for such a tiny creature. Each move tells the others where to go, he explains. Direction, distance, quality, all packed into a few seconds of movement. You pause. They're encoding maps in interpretive dance, he laughs. Exactly. There's something oddly human about it, this need to share, to guide, to point out beauty. And yet, while modern science confirms this communication, medieval observers didn't need proof to feel wonder. Some old texts describe bees blessing the air with their spirals, or drawing sacred circles to protect the hive. One 14th century monk even wrote, "When bees dance, the world listens." You step back and try mimicking the figure eight yourself, just a little. It's harder than it looks. You spin, wobble, nearly trip over a rock. Graceful, the beekeeper teases. Shut up, you laugh. Later that evening, you help him build a new skep. As you wind straw into tight coils, he tells you about the lore surrounding dancing bees. Dancing bee. In some villages, he says, if a bee danced on the bride's veil during the wedding, it meant abundance. But if it danced on the coffin cloth, it meant a soul was restless. You blink. Even the dead had to share their GPS. Apparently, there were darker superstitions too. Bees seen dancing at dusk were thought to be fairies in disguise, or omens. Some claimed a dancing bee seen on your windowsill at night foretold a journey or a death. You ask him if he believes in the omens. I believe in bees, he replies, and they believe in patterns. As the sun dips low, the bees slow their movements. The dances become fewer. The sky shifts from gold to deep blue, and the hive begins to settle. But you find yourself thinking about all those medieval keepers watching bees dance without knowing what it meant, just feeling the importance of it. They didn't need the science, they had the rhythm, the hum, the quiet miracle of creatures moving in perfect, purposeful spirals. You rest your hand on Branwen's hive, eyes half closed, and whisper, "Good dance today." She hums in response, steady, soft, serene. And somewhere in that sound, maybe there's still a message you've yet to understand. The wind turns colder. You feel it in your fingertips as you tug your cloak tighter. The orchard's flowers have gone soft and brown, leaves rustle like parchment, and the bees, once manic in their motion, move slower now, less urgency, less dancing, more drifting. They feel it, the beekeeper says, voice hushed. Before we do, you follow him down the orchard row, the straw path wet with morning dew that refuses to dry. The hives look still, not empty, not abandoned, but sleepy, waiting, the kind of stillness that only comes before winter. They'll seal themselves in soon, he says. Prop up walls, close the vents, huddle close. You kneel beside Branwen's hive. The hum is softer today, but it's there, a deep, collective exhale beneath the straw. You whisper, "Is she all right?" The beekeeper nods. She's in the center, surrounded. It's the last ritual of the year, preparing the hives for winter sleep. You help gather the materials, linen wraps, dried moss, old wool scraps. Nothing modern, nothing plastic, just layers, warmth, care. One by one, you dress the skeps. You bind the bases with rope, plug gaps with tufts of clean sheep's wool, and tuck dried herbs near the entrances, lavender for calm, thyme for breath, rosemary for remembrance. You don't rush, no one does. Treat it like a farewell, the beekeeper says. Not goodbye, just see you in the thaw. You remember now what he told you on your first day, that the bees remember your voice, that they know your scent, that every touch matters. So you take your time. You pause at each hive, lay a hand on its roof, and say something gentle, not always a sentence, sometimes just a word, sometimes nothing at all. Branwen is last. You kneel, press your cheek to the skep. The hum inside is faint, but warm, like the echo of a candle burning far away. You whisper, "Sleep well." In medieval times, preparing hives for winter was part science, part superstition. Some keepers buried their skeps halfway underground. Others stacked stones around them in protective circles. Some whispered charms to the bees. Some recited psalms. Historians still debate whether these practices were effective or simply psychological comfort. But the outcome was always the same: survive the dark months, emerge with the light. The beekeeper sets a small beeswax candle on each skep roof, unlit but ready. "So they'll remember the sun," he says. You smile. The orchard is quiet now. No more dancing, no more theft, no more singing charms into the wind, just the gentle presence of life, pulling inward. And as dusk deepens, you and the beekeeper sit on the low stone wall that borders the orchard, watching, not talking, breathing in the smoke of the last fire, the last bundle of sage. "I'll miss them," you whisper. "They're still here," he replies. "Just sleeping?" The stars come out one by one, and the orchard waits. The world grows softer now. You lean back against the tree, its bark cool and steady behind you, and gaze up at a sky slowly filling with stars. The orchard has faded into shadow, and the hives sit like sleepy sentinels in the dark, bundled, silent, sealed in warmth. The wind is gentler now, brushing past your cheeks like a whisper from the edge of a dream. You let it carry the last echoes of the day, the hum of wings, the rustle of linen, the crackle of straw. All the small sounds that once filled the orchard are quiet now, folded into the stillness of night. You close your eyes. You picture Branwen's hive beneath its cloak, bees curled close around their queen, bodies pressed together like coals in a sacred fire. There's no more work to do, no more songs to sing. The bees are safe. The world is held gently in the hush before the frost. You breathe in slow. Let it go. Let it go. The orchard fades and your thoughts drift with it, floating like smoke, curling like ribbon, quiet as candlelight. Tomorrow will come, but not now. Now you sleep.